Good afternoon all and welcome back. Next we'll be proceeding to the third session of the event, Orthosis and Prosthesis. And we have a lecture by Dr. Anuradha Divakar Shenoy on the topic Spinal Orthotics and Scoliosis Management. Ma'am is Assistant Professor in Department of PMR in AIIMS, Bhopal. Welcome ma'am.
Am I audible? Very good afternoon to all of my respected teachers, seniors, my colleagues. In this session, I will be presenting the topic of spinal orthotics, and I will be focusing on the bracing in the scoliosis. So before going into that, we'll see the little bit about the biomechanics and the structure of the spine. So as you know, the spine is not a straight structure. There is a curvature in the sagittal plane with a cervical lordosis of normally around 20 to 40 degrees, thoracic kyphosis of 20 to 50 degrees, and lumbar lordosis of 20 to 80 degrees. And during the process of evolution, the curvature is formed because of our upright posture. So that keeps the center of rotation below towards the anterior part of the S2 spine. So when we think about the movement in a spine, the functional spinal unit that consists of two vertebrae, the intervertebral disc and the associated ligaments, that is the unit around which all the movement occurs. Because the spine has a curvature in the sagittal plane and there are muscles that are supporting the spine, the co-activation of these muscles makes sure that the axial load that falls on the spine follows that curvature of the spine that gives stability to the spine in the upright posture. So the spine is basically supported by the ligaments, as you know. There is anterior longitudinal ligament, posterior longitudinal ligament, there is ligamentum flava, interspinous ligament and supraspinal ligaments that helps in the restriction of movements in flexion, extension and rotations. Then there are muscles that are also very important in the maintaining the stability of the spine. So posteriorly in the cervical region, you have your semispinalis capitis, semispinalis cervicis. Down there is erector spinae. Then in front you have your oblique muscles, transversus abdominis, rectus abdomini, and then there is also thoracolumbar fascia, which along with the posterior muscles and the anterior muscles form an internal corset-like structure that gives stability to the spine. The movement in the spine is also one factor that determines the movement in the spine is the orientation of the facets. So as you know, in the cervical, thoracic and the lumbar spine, the orientation of the facet differs. So in the cervical spine, it is more of backwards, upwards and medially oriented. When it comes down to the thoracic spine, it is backwards, upwards and little it shifts towards the lateral orientation. And the sagittal, in the lumbar spine, it is more parallel to the sagittal plane. So as you go from up to downward, the rotation movement, it is more in the cervical spine, and as you come downwards to the lumbar spine, it is more restricted. The movement also occurs, one more factor is the instantaneous axis of rotation in the spine. So for each movement, like for example in flexion extension, the instantaneous axis of rotation, the position will be different. For lateral bending, the position will be different, and for rotations, it will be different. The axial compression load, when there is an axial compression load on the spine, that load is evenly distributed by the intervertebral disc also, which act as a shock absorber. So whenever there is a axial loading of the spine, the nucleus pulposus will deform, it will push the annulus fibrosus, and the annulus fibrosus will then try to contain these forces and transmit it downwards, which from the vertebrae, the trabecular system transmits it downwards. So as you can see here, in a normal disc, it is uniformly distributed, but as in a degenerated disc in disease, it will be uneven. So this is the range of motion in spine in the cervical, thoracic and in the lumbar region. So as you can see, the rotation is more in the C1, C2, and the flexion, it is flexion extension, almost all segments are contributing to it in the cervical spine. Rotation in the thoracic spine, in the upper part it is restricted because of the rib cage, and in the lumbar spine you can see because of the parallel orientation of the facet in the sagittal plane, it is more, it allows more of a flexion extension movement. Coming to the spinal orthosis, the function of a spinal orthosis is to give support to the spine. It gives a proprioceptive feedback, it helps in managing the pain and also gives a positional control. So the principle of any orthosis is a 3-point pressure system. It gives an intersegmental movement restriction, it decreases the load on the spine, and when it comes to the thoracic and the lumbar orthosis, it increases the intra-abdominal pressure. That in turn reduces the paraspinal muscle overload, and that in turn reduces the muscle fatigue. So the complications with the orthosis are, as it is very in close contact with the body, it can cause a skin breakdown, it can cause pain, it can cause muscle atrophy, and with the cervical thoracic orthosis, it can cause dysphagia and it can also reduce the vital capacity. Depending upon the segment which is restricting, which spine segment is restricted, you name that spinal orthosis depending on that. In that also we have rigid and well as the soft garments and support. In the rigid one we have cervical orthosis, and if it is restricted in the cervical and upper part of the thorax, it is cervicothoracic orthosis. Then you have cervicothoracic lumbosacral orthosis is there, then thoracolumboacral orthosis, lumbosacral orthosis and sacroiliac orthosis. In soft garments you have cervical collar, you have dorsolumbar corsets, lumbosacral corsets and sacroiliac belt. So coming to the cervical orthosis and cervicothoracic orthosis, as I said, there is soft cervical collar. Then you have semi-rigid collars like the one we usually use, that is the Philadelphia collar. Then there is something called as a Miami J collar, Aspen. And then the rigid collars are the Suomi, 4 posters, Halo and Minerva. In that, depending upon which movement is restricted, for flexion extension restriction, you have soft cervical collars, Philadelphia collars, Miami, Thomas. If it is flexion extension and rotation, that is Suomi. If it is flexion extension, rotation and lateral bending, you have 4 poster, Halo West, Minerva and Yale. So coming to the soft cervical collars, it is made up of a soft polyurethane foam which is covered with a cotton stockinette. So it provides a certain amount of warmth in the neck region. So it helps in, it is indicated usually in if there is an early management of whiplash injury for a cervical sprain or a minor spasm, and it usually functions as a kinesthetic reminder for the patient. When coming to the Philadelphia collar as a Miami J collar, it is more of a semi-rigid collar where you have an anterior and a posterior part that is attached with a velcro. So in Miami J you can see that there is more of a thoracic extension anteriorly is there. It is usually indicated in anterior cervical fusion if it is done in anterior discectomy, cervical strains, post-operative stabilization or after a Halo device removal. So you have a mandibular support, posteriorly you have a occipital support, anteriorly it abuts the sternum and posteriorly it is molded over the upper part of the thorax. The next is the Aspen and Malibu collar. So this is also similar to, indications are similar to the Philadelphia collar. The only thing is that the Aspen has an inbuilt padded, this cover is there inside as compared to Philadelphia collar. And all these cervical collars are usually indicated in the mid-cervical region immobilization. In certain like Malibu J collars or in Miami J collars or Malibu collars, you can also have a thoracic extension that will immobilize up to the T2 level of the spine. So in studies it has been seen that when it comes to the movement restriction, the Miami J is more effective as compared to Aspen, as compared to the Philadelphia in flexion extension restriction. And again, the Malibu collar provides more sagittal plane restriction than Miami collar. Next, coming to the cervicothoracic orthosis, rigid orthosis. This is a sternal occipital mandibular immobilizer. So it is effective more in cervical flexion, and it can also be used in patients, and it is comfortable for patients who require more of a supine positioning because there is an occipital pad that can swivel away. Again, the lateral bending restriction is less in Suomi, and indications are in kind of stable fractures with minimal displacement, and it is better at controlling the flexion at C1 to C5 compared to the Philadelphia collar. These are much more rigid collars as compared to the Suomi. So you have 4 posters, Minerva and Halo devices. So as compared to the Suomi, the 4 posters have a posterior strut also. So there are 4 uprights, 2 anteriorly, 2 posteriorly. There is a sternal plate, there is an interscapular plate, there is a mandibular support is there, chin support is there, and there is a occipital support. So compared to SOMI, as like I said, in SOMI the lateral bending restriction is less, but in 4 posters it is better at controlling the lateral bending. Talking about Minerva and Halo device, it is better at immobilizing C1 and C2, and it immobilizes all the planes, and the Halo device gives a restriction of almost 96% in all the ranges. So this is the chart that describes the range of restriction of each and every collar in each and every movement. So these are the certain conditions and the preferred orthosis in the conditions. So because of the time constraint, I will only say that for most of the cases that we see, for the fusion of spine with stable internal fixation, a semi-rigid cervical collar is preferred. Coming to thoracolumbo-sacral orthosis, the flexion control is provided by a cash brace or a Jewett brace, whereas the sagittal control, that is the flexion extension control, is provided by the Taylor's brace. The flexion extension as well as the lateral bending control is provided by Knight-Taylor brace, and all planes are restricted by the body jacket. So in flexion extension control, again like I said, there is a 3-point pressure system that is applied here with and posteriorly directed forces by the sternal pad, and there is a one pelvic band is there, this ½ inch above the pubic symphysis, and posteriorly there is a lumbar pad that gives anteriorly directed forces, so it forms the 3-point pressure system. And it is usually used for the immobilization from T6 to L1, and it can be used for kyphosis due to the osteoporosis or any stable vertebral body fractures from T6 to L1. Taylor's brace, which is commonly used, it has a pelvic band, it has an interscapular band which gives an anteriorly directed force to limit the extension. It has 2 paraspinal bars and an axillary strap which is posteriorly directed to reduce the flexion, and it also helps in stabilizing the upper thoracic spines like from T3 or T4. It gives a flexion extension control, less of a lateral bending control is there. Again, the level of immobilization is from T6 to L2, and it is usually used for post-surgical management of thoracic and lumbar fractures. The difference between a Knight-Taylor brace and the Taylor brace is that it has only an added lateral uprights that help in limiting the lateral trunk motion. So in thoracolumbar orthosis, there is a body jacket which has an anterior-posterior shell that is fastened by Velcro straps. The anterior shell, the proximal trim line is from the sternal notch to inferior trim line is ½ inch above the pubic symphysis. Posteriorly, it is at the proximally it is at the level of spine of scapula to the sacrococcygeal joint inferiorly. Now, as it is covering the whole trunk section, so it increases the intra-abdominal pressure to reduce the load on the paraspinal muscles, and again the immobilization is from T3 to L3 because the proximal trim lines are more like at the level of sternal notch, so from T3 to L3 it will immobilize, and it is used for immobilization for thoracic compression fractures from osteoporosis. Lumbosacral orthosis, the flexion extension control is provided by a chair back brace. The flexion extension and the lateral flexion control is provided by the chair back Knight brace, and the extension and the lateral flexion is controlled by the William orthosis. Then there is a soft garment like lumbosacral corsets, and most of the lumbosacral corset will have 2 paraspinal uprights also. Encompassing the abdomen and pelvis, it exerts a circumferential pressure that increases the intra-abdominal pressure, reducing the load on the disc and the spine. So it is usually indicated in a low back pain or a lumbar muscle strain. Coming to chair back orthosis, it is more rigid as compared to a corset. So it has 2 posterior uprights, a pelvic band, a thoracic band, an abdominal support, and it has 2 lateral uprights in case of a Knight lumbar chair back orthosis. So the chair back orthosis again gives a flexion extension control, and it is usually used for immobilization anywhere below the L3 level. So it is indicated in immobilization after a lumbar laminectomy or for low back pain or for spondylolisthesis or unloading of the intervertebral disc. Now William flexion orthosis, it has a thoracic band, it has a pelvic band, it has a thoracic band, so it has a lateral upright and it has a oblique bar also. So this will provide a better control of the lateral flexion, and it has an abdominal apron in front, so it is usually indicated in spondylolysis or spondylolisthesis. So these are the orthoses for the level of lumbar spine injuries. So for T12 to L2, we can either use a Jewett orthosis or a cash orthosis or a body jacket. For L3, L4, we can use either a custom molded LSO or off-the-shelf LSO. And for L5 and L5S1, because usually the lumbosacral orthosis that we prescribe, it is seen that even with the lumbosacral orthosis, the movement in the L5S1 segment will be there. So in order to restrict that movement, sometimes the hip spike or a thigh extension can also be given. So sacroiliac orthosis, it gives a proprioceptive awareness of the sacroiliac joint. It decreases the force on the sacrotuberous or the sacrospinous ligament and reduces the sacroiliac joint rotation in the transverse axis. So when coming to the orthosis in the spine infection, this is the chart. Because of the time constraint, I couldn't elaborate on it. So when the PPT will be shared, I think we can go through this. So coming to scoliosis, scoliosis is defined as a curvature of the spine in the coronal plane, that is a lateral curvature, and it is accompanied by a rotation of the spinal column. It is called as scoliosis. So usually a curvature of anything more than 10 degrees is called as a scoliosis. So this is the etiological classification. We have neuromuscular, idiopathic, congenital and miscellaneous. So we will be focusing more on idiopathic. So in idiopathic, the classification is infantile, juvenile and adolescent, in which the adolescent is more common. So we will be focusing more on the bracing in the adolescent idiopathic scoliosis. So the pathogenesis of scoliosis is that, as you know, there is a curvature of spine is there. So in the thoracolumbar region, certain segments of the vertebrae undergoes a posterior shearing force. So posteriorly directed force will be there, as it is seen in here. Whenever there is a posterior directed force, so the facet joint will not be able to give the proper rotational stability because of the posteriorly directed shearing force. And according to the Euler's module of elastic rods, whenever there is an anterior or axial decompression force is put on a flexible rod, it goes into a buckling state. So there is a posteriorly directed shear force along with the anterior axial compression loading is there, that will lead to the buckling. One more theory is that the relative anterior spinal overgrowth. So when the child goes through a growth spurt or a puberty, the axial as well as the muscle and the ligaments has to grow. So when there is unequal growth between the bone and then there is unequal growth in the ligaments or the tendon, it can cause a deforming force leading to the scoliosis. So these are the curve patterns usually seen in scoliosis, that is the thoracic, lumbar, thoracolumbar and double curves are there. Curve progression, the factors that contribute to curve progression are, if the age is less than 12 years, it is usually more seen in females because the female, it is said that the spine during that growth spurt is more flexible compared to male. Plus the hormonal changes that occurs, the ligaments and everything becomes more lax, so more in females, especially in the juvenile and adolescent idiopathic scoliosis when you see. The curve magnitude, if initially when the patient presents to you, the corpse angle is more than 20 degrees, it means that there is more chance of curve progression. And if there is a double curve at the time of presentation or the riser sign, we will come to that. If it is grade 0 or grade 1 as compared to grade 2, or if the patient is presenting to you at menarche. So the riser sign basically is seen to assess the skeletal maturity of that child. So it is basically the ossification of the iliac apophysis over the crest. So it is graded into 5 grades. It goes from lateral to medially and finally it joins to the iliac crest, that is grade 5. So we say for females the skeletal maturity is reached when the child is at the riser grade 4 for females, and for males it is grade 5. One more classification is the Skander skeletal maturity, in which we see the epiphysis of the phalanx, the metacarpals as well as the radius. So indication of bracing is the riser grade is between 0 to 2 because there is more chance of progression. If the corpse angle is between 25 to 39 degrees at presentation, and the corpse angle if it is at 20 to 24 degree with a progression of 5 degree over 6 to 9 months, and if the patient is skeletally immature. So there are certain things we have to consider before prescribing a bracing, that is we have to see if there is a shoulder asymmetry or not, because the trim lines or the placement of the thoracic pad which we give for the correction in whichever orthosis we are prescribing will depend on that. Pelvic asymmetry we have to see. So any patient that comes with scoliosis to you, you have to see the limb-length discrepancy to see whether that is contributing to the pelvic asymmetry or not, because when you are molding the orthosis, you have to correct that tilt of the pelvis before correcting the upper structures. Then if there is any rotational prominence is there, decompensation is there. Decompensation is that when you drop a plumb line from the C7 vertebra, you have to see that if that plumb line is falling in the intergluteal cleft or not. Normally, deviation of 1 to 2 centimeters is acceptable. Anything above that, we say that the scoliosis is decompensated. And we have to see if there is trunk shift or not, how much flexible the curvature is. The sagittal profile we have to see, and in radiological evaluation we see the skeletal maturity. So depending on the riser grade, we do the management. So if the child is presenting to you at the riser grade 0 to 2 with a Cobb's angle of 10 degrees, nothing has to be done. Riser grade 0 to 2 with a Cobb's angle of 11 to 19 degrees, we first observe that child. We ask them to follow up every 6 to 9 months until the patient is skeletally mature. So during the subsequent follow-up, if there is more than 5 degree of progression or the Cobb's angle is more than 20 degree, bracing is indicated. If the Cobb's angle is between 20 to 24 degrees, initially observation is done, again followed up every 4 to 6 months, and the bracing is done if the Cobb's angle increases by 5 degrees over the period of 3 to 6 months. If the Cobb's angle is between 25 to 39 degrees, bracing is indicated. The patient is monitored 5 to 6 months until skeletal maturity. And during that period, if it is increasing by 50 degrees, surgery is indicated. Between 40 to 49, bracing or surgery depending upon the individual, how they present. At riser grade 3, if the Cobb's angle is less than 40 degrees, follow up every 6 to 12 months until after skeletal maturity is developed. For 40 to 49 degrees, we usually don't go for bracing. We follow up every 6 to 9 months is there, and curve progression above 50 degrees is an indication for surgery. 4 and 5 riser grades, less than 30 degree only reassurance is required. At 30 to 49 degrees, depending upon if the patient is having back pain not managed with conservative treatment, we can go for surgeries. So this is the 3-point pressure system for each and every curve is there. So this is a primary thoracic with a secondary lumbar, and this is for the lumbar curvature. So coming to the bracing in scoliosis, we have a Milwaukee brace, which was initially commonly used. So it consists of a pelvic girdle and it has a superstructure. So it consists of one anterior strut and 2 posterior struts. So either you can give a neck ring or a throat mold, and you have a axillary as well as a thoracic sling is there. So it basically works by longitudinal traction force and the transverse forces for the correction or the derotation of the spine. It is usually indicated when the apex is of that is the apex of the scoliosis is about T8. So it gives control in flexion extension, lateral bending, axial rotation of the cervical, thoracic and the lumbar spine. So the pelvic portion makes sure that it reduces the lumbar lordosis, fixes the pelvis, so that in the upper portion we are able to give the proper correction. So the neck ring acts as an endpoint control and limits the lateral sway. There is a thoracic pad that is given, okay, and that acts as a main corrective force, or the derotation force is there. So the thoracic and axillary slings are there, so it gives the counter force for the correction from the thoracic pad. The active correction also takes place when the patient tries to correct themselves from that lateral force that is given through the thoracic pad. So the disadvantage is that it can cause pain, it can cause jaw malocclusion, it can cause skin breakdown and low compliances because it is not very cosmetically appealing. Next is the Boston brace, which is a low profile TLSO. It is usually given when the apex is T6 to T8. In various books it is given T6, some books T6, some books T8 it is given. So again it uses passive as well as the active correction forces. So there is a apical pad that provides passive correction forces on the convexity. So this is how it is usually molded. So first we see whether there is any pelvic asymmetry is there or not. If there is a pelvic asymmetry, we will provide a trochanteric pad. Then if there is a lumbar curvature is there, a lumbar pad is placed. Then a iliac crest roll is provided here that fixes the pelvis. When there is a thoracic curvature is also there, just below the rib of the apex, thoracic pad is given, so it uplifts that rib. And then as a counter force, we give an axillary extension on the opposite side. That is one mechanism. Then there is a derotation force. That is, you put there is a lumbar pad posteriorly it is given. So this is a lumbar pad posteriorly it is given, and anteriorly over the abdomen one more force is given. So it acts by derotating the spine. So whenever you give a force over the convex side, on the opposite side you give a void so that the body is able to move towards that side. Coming to the Wilmington brace, again it is a low profile total contact TLSO with the scoliosis with the apex at D7 and below. So usually what happens is that on a riser frame, the patient is made to lie in the supine position, a longitudinal traction is placed and a derotation force is applied depending upon the curvature of the spine. And once an X-ray, so casting is made and an X-ray is taken, if 50% reduction in the curvature is there, so it is fixed and the customized TLSO is made. Charleston brace, three more slides. Charleston brace and Providence brace, these are nighttime braces. Okay, so Charleston brace is given with overcorrecting the curvature of the spine, but it only corrects the lateral curvature. Whereas the Providence brace, there is a lateral curvature as well as the derotation force is also provided. So this is a spine core brace, which is a more flexible brace is there, usually given for corpse angle at 15 degrees. It is a non-rigid brace, so there are various straps that are applied that helps in giving the correction of the spine. These are other scoliosis braces like Chennu brace, lion brace, progressive action short brace. So this also acts on the process of active and passive corrections with the traction forces as well as the derotation forces that are given on the spine. So with that I will conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Next, may I request Professor Dr. Rajendra Sharma sir, Professor and HOD, ESIC Medical College and Hospital, Faridabad. Sir will be talking about lower limb orthosis and flow reaction orthosis. Welcome, sir.
If we look at lower extremity orthosis, they are designed to enhance achievement of stance phase stability and swing limb clearance. These are the two main goals for which lower limb orthotics are used. In addition, they provide limb repositioning, adequate step length, and they provide efficiency of gait by saving some energy. And they are indicated to relieve pain, immobilize musculoskeletal segments, prevent or correct deformities so as to improve function, and ultimate result is improving gait. Orthoses are named for the joints they span. Foot orthoses are there, ankle foot orthoses are there, knee orthoses are there, knee ankle foot orthoses are there, then there are hip orthoses, and then there are hip knee ankle foot orthoses, and there are many more orthoses. So you can have a full lecture on each of these. So I will try to cover all in one lecture. So before we go into detail of orthosis as such, you must understand the biomechanics of ankle joint. Ankle joint, if you look at, is inclined about 20 degrees in relation to the knee joint axis. This is very important for positioning the joints because this makes ankle and subtalar mechanism as a oblique hinge joint. So when external rotation of tibia causes inversion of subtalar joint, and internal rotation of tibia causes inversion of vice versa. So this part being base of any lower limb orthosis, this has to be managed very properly to align subtalar mechanism. For a custom foot orthosis, the subtalar joint should be placed in a neutral position before casting. The subtalar neutral is used to treat conditions associated with hyperpronation, including pes planus, and painful foot conditions like rheumatoid arthritis. So first foot orthosis, UCBL foot support is there. It was developed at University of California Biomechanics Lab somewhere in 1980. It is a shoe inserted by 3-point pressure, helps in prevention of foot deformity. It also helps to arrest further progression if there is any deformity. And it has been found to be very useful in conditions like plantar fasciitis, fracture of tarsals, metatarsals, non-specific painful conditions of the foot. Now mechanism, which I was talking about, the hinge mechanism at subtalar joint is demonstrated here in this slide. You can see that while we take a bolt for any such appliance like UCBL, we externally rotate the log, adapt the foot, so it basically elevates the medial arch without causing any pressure. And then we try to hold this position by 3-point pressure system. This is the basic mechanism. So here you can see the trim lines so that we are able to maintain 3-point pressure system. Coming to next orthosis, that is supramandibular orthosis. It was in wake for some time. It just extends proximal to malleoli and provides some swing phase control as well, in addition to mediolateral control as well as maintaining position of the talus properly. The uses are flexible pes planus, bioturbate spastic, equinovarus. It is very useful. Now, before we go further in any AFO or any foot orthosis, you have to maintain the 3 rockers of gait. 3 rockers of gait are that there is a heel strike, then there is a loading phase, then there is mid stance, and then there is push-off mechanism. So loading phase, the heel strikes, then it is gradually relaxed by eccentric contraction of tibialis anterior and quadriceps, so as it goes into foot flat position. That is one mechanism. After that, the second phase, what happens? Tibia rotates anteriorly to cause a little bit of dorsiflexion at foot, and this mechanism is again controlled by eccentric contraction of the soleus and gastrocnemius. After that, it goes into push-off mechanism where gastrocnemius and soleus actively contribute to cause plantar flexion, and which is then supported by dorsiflexion of metatarsal to go into actual push-off. Tibialis anterior then takes over to basically initiate swing mechanism. So it is very important. For advanced orthotics, we try to get these rockers as near to normal as possible. That is the whole biomechanic principle of having these orthoses. So coming to ankle foot orthosis, the purpose is to control amount of dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. They in addition provide mediolateral stability, helps in prevention of equinus, varus and valgus deformity. They prevent dragging of foot by supporting it during swing phase, and they also stabilize the knee during gait. Now this has to be understood very clearly because this is the principle through which FRO acts. A cushioned heel helps move the ground reactive force more anteriorly at the foot and subsequent at the knee and helps stabilize the knee. So whenever you are using a solid ankle or subtalar mechanism, it is important that you provide a cushioned heel and a rocker mechanism. Otherwise, second phase of rocker will be enhanced. It will come quickly, leading to short steps. Cadence will be decreased. Plantar flexion creates a knee extension moment, and dorsiflexion creates a knee flexion moment, which is used in management of quadriceps weakness as well as hyperextension at knee. Coming to conventional AFO, these are stronger than plastic AFO, so can be prescribed for obese patients as well as in patients who have edema problem, where limb size decreases or increases throughout the day, which cannot be accommodated in a plastic closely designed orthosis. So it has a calf band which distributes weight. Then the calf band should be 1 inch below the fibular neck to prevent compression of common peroneal nerve. Ankle joint may be incorporated with various kinds of stops and attists to facilitate dorsiflexion or to restrict plantar flexion or to restrict dorsiflexion depending on the foot condition or the condition we are treating. A summary of this is projected. If we put a pin in posterior channel, it limits plantar flexion and it is indicated in plantar spasticity, toe drag with pain with ankle motion. If we put a posterior channel, a spring is put, it assists dorsiflexion and is helpful in flaccid foot drop and knee hyperextension, because dorsiflexion helps in reducing hyperextension. Anterior spring is not required for any clinical indications. Plastic AFOs, they are cost effective, good cosmesis, lightweight, interchangeability with shoe, ability to control varus valgus deformity, and provision of better support with cushioned customized foot portion because it is closely bound, so you are able to hold all the joints properly. Various kinds are there, solid plastic AFO, plastic ankle foot orthosis with varus valgus control, floor reaction orthosis, patellar tendon bearing ankle foot orthosis, and Charcot relief walkers. So posterior leaf spring AFO is a solid AFO, but trim lines lie behind malleoli and ankle is flexible. This allows plantar flexion at heel strike and springs back in swing phase to assures clearance of the foot. So it helps with all the three rockers because of its flexibility. So this is a device which can be used in flaccid foot drop conditions. Second is solid plastic AFO. Trim lines are anterior to the medial malleolus. Ankle is rigid, not flexible, for the treatment of some cases of plantar spasticity. Here you cannot provide that. Here the mechanism through which you can provide three rockers is by using cushion heel. Mount this orthosis on a cushion heel and rocker sole. Now here molded AFO again, foot component beyond metatarsal heads to control spasticity. This is another modification and it can be reinforced by carbon fibers inserts around ankle joint. Articulated AFO with plantar flexion stop is used in spastic spasticity and patient is active. This sub-movement allowance at ankle, it helps in second phase of rocker. After foot flat, the tibia is able to roll over to complete the second rocker. Tone reducing AFO, tone inhibiting AFO, the International Society of Orthotics and Prosthetics had advised that these terms should not be used because there is not enough evidence to document that it really basically reduces any spasticity. Hinged AFO with camber axis hinge joint, it provides forward motion of the tibia through the second ankle rocker of stance phase. Again, because of mobility, it is able to provide through ankle joint. Solid AFO mounted on sach heel and rocker, which I have been repeatedly telling. Here is an example on right side. If you can see, there is a sach heel and a rocker system which is constructed on a wooden sandal. This allows shock absorption at heel strike, simulate plantar flexion, smoothens transition from first rocker to second rocker, and facilitates third rocker and push off. Prefabricated carbon graphite AFOs are now available. They are lighter weight. Lower profile footplate is there. The ability to provide some dynamic response to substitute for weak plantar fractures. They fit easily in any style of shoe. And disadvantage is that there is a poor mediolateral control because of low lower profile footplate. There is no valgus or varus control, and they lack adjustability because they are prefabricated. They cannot be adjusted according to patient size. So just to preview, for foot drop, you can use a posterior leaf spring AFO. Foot drop with mediolateral strictity, you can use a hinged plastic AFO or hinged midline posterior stop. Plantar spasticity, hinged AFO with plantar stop at neutral and lumbar spinal cord injury. To manage the weight line, you need to give 5 degree of dorsiflexion at ankle. Coming to the next in AFO category, that is patellar tendon bearing AFO. It is made of a plastic bivalve and fits snugly with use of Velcro straps or buckles. It is used as an offloading and supporting device. Weight is borne by patellar tendon, medial tibial condyle, and soft tissue of the entire leg. Coming to the weight distribution, 10% of weight is transferred to the patellar tendon and tibial condyle. 50% of weight bearing reduction is achieved by custom fitted contact distributed through the leg, and additional weight bearing reduction can be obtained by eliminating ankle motion by providing sach heel. They can be reinforced by carbon graphite and use of a rocker bottom. So sach heel and rocker bottom, whenever you are using a fixed ankle mechanism, is very important. So indications for this kind of orthosis are Charcot joint, post-operative ankle joint fusion, calcaneal fractures, diabetic heel ulcers, avascular necrosis of foot or ankle, and tibial fractures, delayed human kind of. PTB-FO with pattern bottom, here a foot plate or a pattern end is provided and there is no weight bearing on feet. and this helps the pattern, and it hits the ground and transmits force via the lateral arterites to the proximal portion of the leg, and the foot is totally offloaded. So this is the maximum where you can basically reduce maximum weight bearing on the foot. Indications are plantar ulcers and to protect calcaneal fractures until healing is completed. Charcot relief orthotic agar, it is used as a substitute for total contact casting, which is basically standard of care for diabetic foot ulcers. The casting molded bivalve plastic AFO that is fully padded and in total contact, used as offload a plantar ulcer or stabilize the progressive deformity. Again, it has a rocker bottom and rubber sole, as I have been repeatedly emphasizing. Coming to flow reaction orthosis or ground reaction AFO or flow reaction AFO. The principle is based on Newton's third law, which says action and opposite reaction. Weight of the body over the ground is the action. GRF acting up against the knee is the reaction. This is a custom-made orthosis made of polypropylene or carbon fiber reinforcement for around ankle joint. It was introduced by Saltiel, who observed the patients with the flail quadriceps were able to walk with equinus deformity without any appliance. So that example was an indication wherein he thought that if we put ankle in plantar flexion through any orthotic device, we can achieve stabilization of the knee. So ground reaction force or weight line is very important while we are talking about the biomechanics, and equal and opposite force acting upward from ground on the foot against the vertically downward directed weight of the body. During a gait cycle, ground reaction force alignment will pass from one side of the joint center to the other side. So this is the position of this GRF, which basically determines the stability of hip joint, knee joint as well as ankle joint. So parts of FRO are, there is a knee piece just below the knee which is padded because of weight pressure is distributed through it. Two uprights are there, foot plate, stiff long toe plate, ankle is at slight plantar flexion, that is 5 to 8 degree. Now how do we determine adequate angle of equinus? After several trials, it has been concluded that heel of the shoe should be ½ inch above the ground. So that much of equinus is required in the orthosis while we are talking about flow reaction also. So then how to do it? To do it, you can see the next picture wherein a wooden slope block is placed there, which is of 1 inch height, which means there will be ½ inch of equinus in the orthosis and ½ inch will be covered by the heel of the shoe. So ultimately you will be left with ½ inch of equinus to basically make this mechanism work. The mechanism here is that we utilize plantar flexion knee extension couple. Ankle is fabricated at slight plantar flexion. It restricts the tibia rollover second rocker. The second rocker, that is during foot flat or mid stance, tibia rolls over. So this plantar equinus kind of forefoot strike, it basically overrides that ankle rocker of second ankle rocker, and ground reaction force then passes anterior to the knee joint and an extension moment at the knee is created. Now indications, they are very diverse indications. Quadriceps weakness started with an orthosis for quadriceps weakness in post-polio paralysis to eliminate hand on thigh gait, but now it is more and more used in management of crouch gait, knee flexion attitude. So FRO in quadriceps weakness, basically how it acts. The role of quadriceps is in early phase, stance phase, when it basically eccentrically contract to support loading response, and early mid stance phase, where eccentric contraction of quadriceps is there so that buckling is prevented. But if quadriceps is not there, in such situation, initial contact with the forefoot because of equinus provided in the orthosis provides horizontal component of ground reaction force transmitted to the two lateral uprights, which ultimately comes to anterior knee band and presses the knee back and stabilizes the knee. So FRO basically acts in early stance phase here to push knee back by ground reaction forces. So coming to case selection, while we are talking about quadriceps weakness, they are very diverse. Crouch gait and quadriceps weakness in paralytic condition, they are very diverse indications. So there should be no fixed deformity at hip bending, no genu, valgum or varum, no calcaneus deformity. Good power calcaneus deformity will basically lead to provision of, because he tends to descend down, it will require more equinus, more and more equinus, so it will be difficult to stabilize. Good power in hip extensors, hamstrings and plantar flexors can be there. Bilateral FRO is not feasible because you cannot work on equinus in boxing. Now, how FRO is used in crouch gait? Crouch is caused due to ankle plantar flexor weakness, mostly soleus, lever arm dysfunctions, knee and hip flexion contractures. Iatrogenic causes wherein after TA landing is done basically without proper case selection, TA landing. Mechanism is foot plate at plantar flexion helps the weak compromised plantar flexors function, restore the plantar flexion in knee. Extension couple assist the compromised extension mechanism of the knee. Here you can see this. In crouch, dorsiflexion, flexion, it causes your knee GRF to go posterior to knee and causes a flexion movement. So by putting it in equinus, the ground direction force is brought end to knee and then it pushes back and reduces crouch. The many studies have basically mentioned about very varying kind of decrease in crouch, but the mean is about 17% decrease in crouch angle is available, can be achieved through this device. So there is some modification. This is rear entry flow reaction orthosis. Is what they have done. They have provided an ankle joint and then the plantar flexion mechanism through a knee shell placed anteriorly. So it is easy to move in because of crouch. It was difficult to basically doffing was difficult because of the deformities at knee. So now it is helpful in mild cases to some extent and moderate cases. Here you can see this is anterior knee. The knee block is ankle block is provided there. So coming to prerequisites for FRO to be used in crouch gait, you have to have quadriceps power of minimum 3/5. It gets balanced hamstring and quadriceps they get balanced at that point. Absence of hip and knee flexion contracture exceeding 10 degrees, presence of some trunk balance and ability to use any walking aid. No notable knee recurvatum or cruciate ligament insufficiencies, no excessive tibial torsion or foot deformity. The sparsity should be controlled. So I have got a message that I have completed my given time, so I think I should move to, I can skip all this. And we'll move to summary or conclusion. So there are many different reasons for prescription of an orthosis. We need to define the goal and select the design and components that will best meet the patient's needs and the biomechanical consideration possible or available in that particular case. No orthosis makes walking normal, but an appropriate orthosis can make walking more functional and less energy costly. There is no one-size-fits-all, but orthotic prescription requires thoughtful deliberation about the functional benefits and trade-offs and the financial cost involved. Thank you so much.
Talk about 15 minutes. I think you will read it and it will be more beneficial.
It's up to you.
Although we will be sharing the PPT, but
No, whatever you say.
sir, please take another 15 minutes.
जो भी ऑर्गेनाइजर है उनकी बात मान ली.
Sir, 15 minutes. Please complete it, sir. Please complete.
Why this preferential treatment? It is going to favor you or favor me?
Favor us and the students.
That's what I thought. It is important, actually, such a huge topic. So we have done till here. So we will types of KFO. Now we come to, there is conventional KFO with added thigh band, metal uprights, and knee joint with various kind of locks. And the consideration here is that medial upright must end 4 cm below the perineum, so that there is no pinching of perineum. And lateral upright must be 2.5 cm higher than the medial upright, but below the greater token point. So these are the design considerations while we are talking about KFO, that is conventional KFO. Craig Scott KFO is modification to make this orthosis lightweight. A modified version of conventional KFO designed to be lightweight and capitalize on alignment stability. Indications are complete lesion of L1 or higher paraplegia to facilitate their ambulation, and components are ankle joint with 5 degree of dorsiflexion and posterior stop, rigid anterior tibial band and a rigid posterior thigh band. So we are doing away with kneecap and everything. We are having minimum kind of bracing required. A sole plate extending to the metatarsal heads, a crossbar added to the metatarsal head area for mediolateral stabilization, and an offset knee joint with a bell lock, a cushioned heel to absorb shock or loading. So you are minimizing the components. It is given in dorsiflexion at ankle 5 degree dorsiflexion, and then patient is trained to lean forward, take his back so that weight line passes anterior to knee, posterior to hip joint. This needs to be trained, and that's how they are trained to walk with using crutches. Some special training will be required, and because they will be walking with free knee, standing with free knee, offset knee joint is there. Thermoplastic KFO, they are lightweight, less energy consumption. You see, because these devices, they were very heavy, so rejection rate is about 90% for conventional orthosis. Thermoplastic KFO, lightweight, less energy consumption, can walk faster. Shells, distal part is like AFO, and with calf shell, ankle joint and shoe insert. Thigh shell covers posteriorly and straps are provided anteriorly. Uprights are bilateral metal uprights, and in some stances we can use steel weight bearing cuff on the top. This, in addition to provide if there is rotational problem around hip, it can control that. Because of pressure get distributed and steel weight bearing is there, and more circumference is provided, coverage is provided, it also basically controls rotational problems which otherwise would have need HKFO to be used to control those. Now orthotic knee joints, there is straight set knee joint with drop lock, there are polycentric knee joints wherein it provides something similar to the normal knee joint through a mechanism, and there is posterior offset knee joint. This is important. This is for patients with weak knee extensor, free flexion and extension of the knee during. Keep the orthotic ground friction force in front of knee axis for stability. Now if you are using a joint, then you need to have a locking mechanism. There are ratchet locks which basically you can move in 12 degrees increments. The bell lock is there which you can unlock without using your hands. And then there is a dial lock which is used basically you have some 6 degree adjustments in the movement of femur and tibia, and you can use it in flexion contractures to gradually stretch the contracture. Coming to stance control knee joint, Philauer stance control knee joint, foot orthosis with mechanical knee control mechanism, various kind of stance knee control with mechanical, hydraulic, electromagnetic and computer based systems have come, but they have a problem about indications because they will need a good control of hip, number one. You can't use them in severe spasticity, number two. Number three is if you have significant shortening of say around 3 inches, these devices cannot be used. So although they are very efficient devices, cost definitely is a consideration. Basically, few of them, these devices, they provide a variable kind of, whenever you put weight, it's not only heel strike control, whenever the weight is borne on these devices, they lock. So they can also help in, you see, uneven grounds, walking on uneven ground, climbing slopes, walking up and down the stairs. So that kind of possibility is there. So they provide weight bearing stability in stance, does not interfere with swing phase, knee flexion. The stance control KFO, this is designed to lock the orthotic knee joint in extension at initial contact and during most stance, and unlocking the knee on heel rise during the third rocker in the transition from terminal stance to pre-swing. The variety of mechanisms I have told: mechanical, hydraulic, computer microchip, electromagnetic, usually placed on lateral upright of the KF. You don't need to put them both, you can only put on one upright. Coming to knee orthosis, their indications are medial lateral knee stability, instability, anterior posterior knee instability, post-operative stabilization or support, prophylactic bracing to reduce the risk of ligamentous injury, motion restriction, flexion, extension, hyperextension, rotation control, to provide motion restriction, offloading medial or lateral compartment as used in osteoarthritis, and they can also help in patellar tracking. So most common device here is Swedish knee cage, which uses 3-point orthotic system with 2 bands placed one above, and if you need, that is the problem with these devices is of suspension. They tend to fall. There is no anchorage, so it is difficult to place them in place. So additional 5 band is added to provide some kind of leverage as well as suspension possibility. Genu varum, mermaid splint in children, the old timers splint very commonly used very commonly while we were students. Provide 3-point pressure for active forces for varus valgus. In adults, Genu varum lateral wedge shoe is provided with a thought that it helps to shift the ground direction force closer to the midline and alters the weight line. In the fixed deformity, medial wedge shoe, accommodation improving weight distribution. So if it is a fixed deformity, you cannot correct it. You have to provide additional weight bearing, which is possible by providing medial kind of support or through a wedge. T-scope premier double upright knee orthosis, customize the amount of flexion and extension at knee joint, used in post-operative rehabilitation following knee surgeries. It helps protect the knee joint, control swelling and provide stability during the early stages of recovery. Townsend premier double inverter, again used in post-surgery stabilization and controlling the knee. Coming to knee orthosis in osteoarthritis, unloader devices, they use standard orthotic 3-point distribution system in a mediolateral distribution. They are marketed and manufactured by various companies. They all have a similar principle with different mechanisms. Some use a screw to increase that unloading angle. So various kind of devices by also all companies now they are marketed. Coming to hip, knee, ankle, foot orthosis, HKFO are normal KFOs with attached to a hip device, pelvic band, LSO or TLSO requiring hip control. Paralysis of hip abductor muscle is most common reason. Earlier when we used to get cases of polio, if there is abductor extensor paralysis of hip, HKFO was the standard prescription. HKFO with pelvic band. They can incorporate flexion, extension, abduction, adduction control and have field locking joints. Now here you can see hip joint types. There's single axis with 2 position lock. It is very interesting. Locking in full extension to emulate and locking in 90-degree flexion. If one has a spasticity wherein it is being used, he will not be able to sit properly. So to make him sit, he sits, locks, and he is able to maintain that sitting position in a spastic situation. Double axis allows flexion, extension, and abduction, adduction, enables self-catheterization while seated without removing the orthosis. Standing frame, it has balanced the body in space, allows severe disability, mostly Myelomeningocele and those cases who we don't expect to ambulate, they need to be provided some kind of standing so that they are able to interact with their peers at same level. So that is the advantage. Otherwise, they will be sitting on floor only or crawling on floor. So it helps balance the body in space, allows free use of upper limbs for participation in activity. The age range from 8 to 15 months. Very early, they should be provided very early. Parapodium or swivel walker, in which again it is like a standing frame, but there is a swivel mechanism, so they can walk like this. One more thing, the walking speed here is about less than 0.2 meter per second. The normal walking speed is 1 meter per second. Limited community ambulation walking speed is 0.6 meter per second. But they are not able to achieve, so they will be whatever they will be doing in a restricted area. So appropriate for children 2.5 to 5 years, unlikely to become functional walkers because of the severity of their impairments. The hip and knee joints remain locked in extension to permit ambulation in the upright position, but can be unlocked to permit sitting. Difficulties include donning and doffing and rising from a seated position if to the standing position. If they will unlock, you make them sit, they will need assistance to make them stand. Reciprocating gait orthosis, it is hip guided orthosis. Provide contralateral hip extension. If you flex one hip, other one goes into extension. So again, the issue here is that speed, the walking speed for provide contralateral hip extension with ipsilateral hip flexion for children with good upper limb strength, trunk balance, and active hip flexion. The hip joints of the RGO have hip flexion and abduction capabilities on release of locking mechanism. So, swash, sitting, walking, and standing hip orthosis for children with cerebral palsy. It allows basically to keep hip a bit abducted when the child sits, stands, or walks, prevents scissoring. Allow variable abduction at hip, may be helpful in transition from sitting, crawling to standing and walking. Earlier, maybe 5-10 years, lot of fracture bracing was being used when they were non-luminous. Now that they do such a wonderful stabilization, they don't need any, they allow walking immediately. So in such cases where there is delayed union order, you can use fracture bracing. So the orthosis after femur fracture is to provide stability for the bony structure. There is a steel weight bearing and cylindrical component to encircle and provide compression as well as increase the compartment pressure so as to provide distraction. So they provide distraction as well as provide support to improve healing. Orthosis after hip replacement stabilizes the joint until sufficient repair tissue has formed. Hip joint is heading 15-degree abduction. So once again we come back to summary. Many different reasons for prescription of an orthosis are there. We need to define the goal and select the design and components that will best meet the patient's needs and the biomechanical considerations. No orthosis make walking normal, but an appropriate orthosis can make walking more functional, consuming less energy. There is no one-size-fits-all. Every orthotic prescription has to be individualized, and it requires thoughtful deliberation about the functional benefits and trade-offs, and the financial cost consideration has to be there. So thank you so much for giving me double opportunity.
Thank you, sir. Next, shall we have on dais Dr. Om Prakash sir, Professor in PMR Department, SMS Medical College, Jaipur, to talk about prosthetics and selection of suspension. Welcome, sir.
teachers, colleagues, and dear students. I have been asked to teach you regarding the prosthesis and selection of prosthesis. Although it's a vast topic, but still I will try to cover in a given frame time. What is the definition? A prosthesis is a device that is designed to replace as much as possible in functional or in appearance for the lost body part. A successful prosthesis is considered when it is comfortable to wear, have reasonable maintenance, easy to don and doff, and have lightweighted and basically, obviously the cosmetic appearance is good and motivation of the patient should be there. There are some factors that should be considered before prescribing the prosthesis. Obviously the level of amputation should be considered, expected function of the amputee, cognitive function, vocational and avocational history of the patient, and obviously the financial resources of the patient. We will discuss first upper limb prosthesis and then we will go for lower limb prosthesis. The upper limb prosthesis is broadly classified into for body power prosthesis, externally powered prosthesis, for cosmetic prosthesis, and hybrid variety of prosthesis. The body power prosthesis usually use a cable control system to transfer the volitional muscle force or shoulder movement or arm movement to operate the terminal devices or elbow, prosthetic elbow unit. Basically, they are moderate in cost, they are lightweighted, they are more durable and have some sensory feedbacks. But the most body movements parts are required to operate the terminal devices, and so they require more harnessing. Thus, they are least satisfactory in appearance. Externally powered or electric prosthesis are use external signals either by myoelectrical signals or through the batteries to operate the terminal devices or prosthetic elbow. So the minimum harnessing is required in these kind of the prosthesis. So there is least body movement are required, and they provide moderate cosmesis. But they are heaviest in the prosthesis. They are more expensive and need high maintenance. Passive or cosmetic prosthesis. So they are basically non-functional and they are recommended for the cosmetic purpose only, but sometimes these devices are functional in terms of supporting object when the patient is working with bimanual activities. Now the components of body powered prosthesis: socket, harness, cable control system, wrist unit, terminal devices, and possibly any triceps, elbow hinge, elbow or shoulder joints. The terminal devices may be active prehensile type of terminal devices like hook, functional hand, or it may be passive terminal device like cosmetic gloves. The mechanical terminal devices may be voluntarily opening or voluntarily closing. The voluntarily opening terminal devices are more practical. They remain in closed position which is by the springs, and the patient pulls the cable to open these devices, and the prehensile devices are usually they are generated with the help of springs. Whereas the voluntarily closing terminal devices are more physiological, they remain in open position. Patient pull the cable to close these devices, so they have greater proprioceptive inputs, and the prehensile forces are created by the patient itself. Now, next component is prosthetic unit. Basically, the prosthetic unit provides the receptacles for the terminal devices and the movement that can be achieved at the prosthetic unit, that is supination, pronation, and flexion. There are two types of prosthetic wrist, mechanical or electrical. The selection of prosthetic unit in the prosthesis depend upon the level of amputation or a type of amputation, whether it is bilateral amputee or whether it is unilateral amputations. Again, the prosthetic elbow unit, they may be body powered, externally powered, or manual locking types. Now the next component of upper limb prosthesis is prosthetic socket. The function of prosthetic socket is to secure the suspension of the prosthesis. They provide efficient energy transference to the prosthesis. They provide adequate cosmesis. There are two layers in upper limb prosthesis: inner layer and outer layer. The inner layer is contoured to the residual limb, and the outer layer gives length and shape to the prosthesis. Now the suspension system. The function of suspension system, they control the prosthesis as well as the elbow extension or flexion movement of terminal devices, and they also secure the prosthesis. Various kind of suspension systems can be used in the upper limb prosthesis, like harnesses, like figure 8 and figure 9. Figure 9 harnesses usually recommended in self-suspending type of the socket, and shoulder shuttle or chest straps type of suspension is usually recommended for the proximal amputation. Another type of suspension is supracondylar suspension. There are some examples as you can see in this diagram, like a supracondylar, Munster or Norwestern. There are some sockets where suspension is not required, they are self-suspending sockets. Other type of suspensions are like hemi-suction or silicone. suction suspension. The silicone sleeves they are attached with a distal and pin that fit into the shuttle socket mechanical way. It improves the suspension by means of negative atmospheric pressure. They are simplifying in donning and docking. They are lighter in weight and better range of motion can be achieved at the elbow joint. Now the important component of the upper limb prosthesis is control mechanism. How we can control the terminal devices, how we can flex, how we can achieve the flexion and extension movement at the elbow, and how we can lock the elbow joint. In body power processes, we use cable control system. Like nylon cable, they are transfer the body movement forces through the cable to the terminal devices or the elbow joint. The body movement, like with the help of scapular abduction, chest wall expansion, or elbow flexion or extension. Whereas in case of external power processes, the electric motors are placed inside the socket. They are responsible for the movements at the elbow joint or extension, flexion, pronation, supination movement at the wrist unit. The motors can be controlled with the switch or myoelectric signals, or sometimes in advanced processes with the help of acoustic signals. Another control system is myoelectric controls that are basically used in myoelectric prosthesis. Here the electric activities are generated with the help of muscle contraction, and the electrodes are placed inside the socket that detect the amplitude of the muscle contraction, and this amplitude is modified and turned onto the motor, and ultimately they bring the movement. The myoelectric controls may be single channel or multi-channel. In single channel, there are two electrodes. One electrode is responsible to close the terminal devices, and another is to open the terminal devices. Whereas in multi-channel, there is single electrode is there inside the socket, and which is the amplitude of signal determines the desired function. In externally powered processor, advanced processor, or electric processes, the components are almost same. The terminal devices, like advanced terminal devices like bionic hands, they have individual motors at the individual joints, and there are electrodes placed inside the socket. Either they receive signal with the help of external batteries or through the myoelectric signals for muscle contractions. Now, brief discussion about the prosthetic consideration at the level of amputation. In case of partial hand amputation, usually does not require any prosthesis, but sometimes we can recommend silicone gloves or fingers for the cosmetic point of view. Surgical consideration may be sometimes recommended in these patients to enhance the improve the prehensile function of the hand. In case of wrist disarticulation, the wrist unit must be thin to minimize the limb length discrepancy, and the socket must be taper and flatten distally. In case of transradial amputation, the socket may be two kinds of sockets, like cornice suspended socket or self-suspended socket. The self-suspended socket are more commonly used. These are Moonster socket or Norwestern supracondylar sockets are commonly prescribed. The Moonster socket is usually recommended where the stump length is short, but there are some side effects, like they decrease the range of motion at the elbow in flexion and extension, and they also prevent the pronation and supination movement of the elbow. Norwestern supracondylar socket is usually accommodated the entire length of the stump, and they are indicated in short as well as long stumps. In case of elbow disarticulation, the design of socket is such that it should be flat and broad distally. The external elbow joint is usually used with a cable operated lock on the medial side of the joint, and figure 8, shoulder shuttle or chest stretch are the suspensors that are recommended in this level of amputation. And the control system is two cable control system. Here we use the two cable control system, one to lock the elbow, another is open the terminal devices or to flex the elbow joint. In case of transhumeral amputation, if the residual limb length is adequate, the proximal trim line of the socket should be within the 1 centimeter of the acromion process. Here we can use figure 8, shoulder saddle or chest strap as a suspension. Whereas in case of the residual length is short, less than 35%, the proximal trim line of the socket must be extended more medial to the acromion process, and here we require more secure type of the suspension, like such socket silicone suspension or suspension systems. Again, the elbow joint we use in the transhumeral amputation, internal or external elbow joint may be used depending upon the length of the stump, and control system, dual cable control system is used same as the wrist disarticulation. Shoulder disarticulation. The prosthetic consideration is almost same as the above elbow disarticulation, plus there is a shoulder unit is there. The socket is designed in such a way that it extends up to the thorax, and it should be an open type of socket to decrease the weight and to decrease the displacement problems. Here we should use the triple cable control system. One, first to flexing the elbow, second to operate the terminal devices, and third cable is for locking or unlocking the elbow joint. Now we'll discuss the lower limb prosthesis. The objective of lower limb prosthesis is substitute the body part to restore the function, to minimize the energy expenditure, and the timing when we should prescribe the prosthesis. It may be temporary prosthesis that is usually given immediately on the postoperative period. Early fitting is usually given at the 3 to 6 weeks, but the definitive prosthesis must be given on the stump maturity, usually after the 3 to 6 months. So what are the determinants of outcome of prosthesis? The motivation level of the individual, quality of prosthesis, and the cognitive function of comorbidity or amputee, like the cardiopulmonary status of individual, drug control, upper limb strength, static dynamic balance, etc. Partial foot amputation. In case of small toe amputation, they does not require any kind of the replacement, but some silicone prosthesis can be recommended for the cosmetic point of view. But if there is a great toe amputation, this reduces the push of forces during the terminal swing phase, so prosthesis replacement is required. In these cases, molded insole with arch support is an option. In case of resection or transmetatarsal amputation, shoe filler or shoe modification is required. So modification include the steel shank that extend up to the metatarsal head, that increase the leverage action and help in ambulation of the patient. Now another is Symes amputation. Basically this is the end weight wearing system. Patient can ambulate without wearing any prosthesis for the short distances. The prosthetic considerations include conventional, Canadian or some newer variety of prosthesis. The conventional prosthesis include the leather socket with an anterior opening with attached a modified side foot, and the harnessing is achieved with the laser systems. The Canadian type of Symes prosthesis, they have a plastic laminated socket with attached modified side foot. The medial or posterior opening wall is there. Suspension is in these cases is not required due to the bulbous nature of the stump. And the newer socket design include the expandable air suspension chamber inside the socket or the thin removable expandable inner socket liner. Now the important one is transtibial amputation. The prosthetic consideration here is conventional below knee prosthesis, PTB socket and PTS socket. The most commonly used PTB socket. The components include socket, suspension, shank and foot ankle assembly. The PTB socket has 4 valves: anterior valve, medial valve, lateral valve and posterior valve. Anterior valve extend up to the distal third of the patella, which have an inward PTB bar for the weight bearing. Medial and lateral valve usually extend up to the femoral condyle, and the posterior valve extend below the level of PTB bar. The PTB socket is aligned on the shank in slight flexion position to enhance the loading on the patella to prevent the geniocordatum deformity and to place the quadricep muscle in more efficient position to contract the suspension system. The various kind of suspension system can be used in below knee prosthesis like sleeve suspension, supracondylar cup suspension, supracondylar brim suspension, suction suspension, thigh corset with knee joint, or west weld with Y steps. Sleeve suspension are made of neoprene and they achieve suspension by means of negative pressure flexion between the residual limb or socket or by means of longitudinal tension. They are usually recommended for the long stump and contraindicated in short stump. The most commonly used suspension system is supracondylar cup suspension. They are made of dacrons or lined leathers. They encircle the thigh, femoral condyle and proximal part of the patella. They are easy in downing and locking. They also control the extension movement during the swing phase. But they cannot completely eliminate the pistoning movement, and they does not provide any additional medial level stability. Another suspension is supracondylar brim suspension. Here the PTB supracondylar suspension. The sockets medial and lateral are extend more proximally to the femoral condyle, and anterior are enclose the patella, but posterior remain the same. They are basically required for the very short residual stump and in case patient with medial lateral instability. Suction suspension. The silicone suction suspension, there is a pin attached at the distal end that insert into the locking mechanism at the base of the socket. They improve the suspension. They also increase the range of movement at the knee joint during the flexion, and they decrease the shearing forces at the residual limb. But they are difficulty in downing and locking, and the other disadvantage they may get punctured, and so the suction suspension may force may decrease. The thigh corset with knee joint, this is the most stable and type of a suspension system Here they provide maximum mediolateral stability, but again the disadvantage is they may result in muscle atrophy, especially the thigh muscle atrophy, and they also add weight to the prosthesis and the gait problem is also associated with. The advanced one is osteointegration. Here the surgically implant is inserted at the lower end of the bone, which is directly attached to the shank portion. The next component of the below knee prosthesis is prosthetic shank. In case of exoskeletal prosthesis, the shank is made of hollow wood that is laminated with a plastic resin, and it provides advantage of they provide maximum strength and they are less expensive. The disadvantage include the unusual appearance, and once the prosthesis preparation is completed, we cannot make adjustment at the foot ankle assembly. And in case of endoskeletal prosthesis, the shank is made up of like metals, aluminium, titanium or stainless steel can be, which is covered with a foam. They are lighter in weight, less energy expenditure is there in these kind of the prosthesis. Last component of ankle foot assembly. Various kind of ankle foot assembly is being used nowadays in low-limb prosthesis like sage foot, Madras foot, Jaipur foot, multi-axis, single axis, etc. The sage foot is most commonly used foot heel made of alternative layer of hard and soft rubber. There is a plastic or wood heel in these kind of shoes. The cushion heel compressed during the heel strike, which stimulates the plantar flexion movement. Forefoot dorsiflexion movement is stimulated flexible toe of the inner heel. But in these, the ankle dorsiflexion, inversion or inversion movement is not possible. These kind of shoes are more durable. They are lightweighted. Little maintenance is required. They have low cost and excellent absorption techniques, but they are unable to accommodate on uneven surface. Jaipur foot. It's an improved version. Basically, it's an improved version of sage foot. Act like a soft multi-axial foot. They allow all the natural movement like flexion, extension, inversion, and inversion movement. Basically, they are consist of three blocks: ankle block, and the heel foot block and forefoot block. The ankle block is made up of wood. The alternative layer of wood, they are glued together. Heel and forefoot blocks are made up of microcellular rubber. They are protected by a strong rubber cellular tie cord. So all the three blocks are rolled together with a nylon rubber cord, and finally the cosmetic rubber is covered on the rest. This whole assembly is enclosed in a die and then vulcanized to prepare the Jaipur foot. Single axis foot provide flexion extension movements, and they provide stable flat foot during the stance phase. They increase the knee joint stability and reduce the flexion movement during the loading response. Basically, they are recommended for transhumeral amputation. The multi-axial foot allow movement in all directions, so they are good for walking on uneven surfaces. They are more useful for the patient with knee joint instability, and they also reduce the torque forces during the during stance phase. Dynamic response foot. They use a carbon steel is used in these foot. They absorb the energy on heel strike and release the energy in terminal stance swing phase to provide purposeful movement. So they are basically recommended for the active amputee, joggers, sports person, etc. They are lightweighted, but they are most expensive. Now the last component is sockets, transfemoral prosthesis. The component includes socket, suspension, knee, pylon or foot. We have already discussed about the foot, we have discussed about the pylon, we have discussed about most of the suspension. I will discuss only two portions, that is socket and knee joints. In upper limb above elbow prosthesis, there are two types of socket, that is quadrilateral socket and steel containment socket. The quadrilateral socket is usually recommended for where the stem length is adequate. There are four walls. On the posterior wall, there is a flat sheet that is called ischial sheet, which is weight bearing area during the stance phase, and the anterior wall contain they are contoured to direct force posteriorly on the scarpa triangle, so that to keep the ischium in the position for the better weight bearing. AP diameter is more narrow as compared to the mediolateral diameter in the quadrilateral socket. The ischial containment socket is usually recommended for the short type of the stump. There may be a different type of ischial containment socket depending upon the structure, what the structure the contains inside the socket. Here the AP diameter are more as compared to mediolateral diameter, and to prevent the abduction deformity at the hip joint, they have CAT-CAM mechanism. That means contour anterior trochanter control alignment method to maintain the femur in adduction position and to control the socket rotation containing the ischial tuberosity. There are various suspension systems. Most of them we have already discussed for the above processes like suction suspension, total elastic belt suspension, elastic belt suspension, and osteointegration, crucial liner with air wall expansion. The last is knee joint. The single knee joint, they allow flexion extension movement, and they are usually recommended for the patient who can voluntarily stabilize the knee joint throughout through the active hip extension against the posterior wall of the socket. They are not good for short stem, they are usually recommended for the long stems only. Polycentric knee joint, they rotate in more than one axis. They provide good swing phase clearance during the swing phase. They provide good stance phase stability, so they are recommended for short stem, knee disarticulation and hip extensor weakness patient. Weight activated stance control knee joint. It has a braking mechanism when the weight is applied to the to prevent the unwanted knee flexion in the stance phase. It acts like a single unit in the swing phase. These kind of knee joint are usually recommended in recently amputee, short stem, and the patient with extensor muscle weakness. Another is manual locking type of knee joint. They are recommended for those who completely rely on the stability during stance phase. They are single axis knee joint. The patient usually lock when the knee is in extended position, and patient usually walk with the knee lock in extension. And the last one is hydraulic or pneumatic knee. Basically, their cadence responsiveness is very good. They provide frictional resistance by means of hydraulic rod or pneumatic during the swing phase. They provide variable resistance, so they provide almost normal gait during the walking. They are high in cost and higher maintenance is required. Microprocessor knee joint. Here there are sensors inside the knee joint. The sensor determine the knee position during the swing phase, and they also evaluate or determine the ground reaction forces during the stance phase. So these kind of knee joints are basically recommended for active users or sportsmen or athletes or cadence variable persons. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next, I would like to call upon Dr. Amol Khare, Associate Professor in Department of PMR, AIIMS Raipur, to talk about upper limb orthosis. Welcome, sir.
बड़ा कठिन कार्य है, खाना अभी पचा नहीं है और ये क्लास पीजी के लिए था, तो मैं चाहता हूँ कि यहाँ पे कितने पीजीज है, थोड़ा हाथ ऊपर करेंगे तो मुझे पता चलेगा. हाउ मेनी आर द पीजीज? कितने सो रहे हैं? ऑलमोस्ट 3-4 आर स्लीपिंग. तो थोड़ा नींद को भगाते, उसके बाद ही टीचिंग शुरू करेंगे, अदरवाइज एवरीथिंग विल गो इन अ वेन. दैट्स आई डोंट वांट. एंड basically this presentation I have prepared for PG according to the PG teaching class. So senior faculty, please bear with me. Hopefully if something, any point is beneficial to you too. So overview of my presentation will be, we will start with the nomenclature, then we will go through the how classification is, we proceed with the classification, then what are the goals of upper limb orthosis, categorization, how we categorize. This will be important for exam purpose. Then functioning, biomechanics and indication of each individual orthosis. And we will be moved to the specific orthosis in specific condition, and we will conclude with the take home message. So let me start. So beginning with basic question, what is orthosis? PGs, I want PGs to be awake now. Enough of sleeping. Anybody? Okay. According to the ISO, orthosis is defined as a external applied device used to modify the structure and functional characteristic of neuromuscular or skeletal system. And orthotics is defined as a art and science of making the orthosis. So what is about nomenclature? There are three basic system of nomenclature are there. One we call as a favorite name or common name. Then now commonly followed is the international organization standard or ISO classification, but this is we are now commonly following. But most important and most descriptive is American Society of Hand Therapists, but it is very difficult to understand. Even sometimes it's difficult to understand with the experienced one, but it is most descriptive. ISO classification is very simple. I will be focused on only hand or upper limb orthosis. That is, we will start from distal to proximal finger orthosis, which is particular to the finger, then hand orthosis, then wrist hand orthosis, then hand finger orthosis, then elbow orthosis, then likewise elbow wrist hand orthosis, shoulder orthosis likewise. So coming, how this nomenclature differ? Anybody identify this orthosis? Easy. Aeroplane splint. What is ISO name? ISO name is a shoulder orthosis. Sometimes shoulder, elbow, wrist orthosis will be there, but this is only shoulder orthosis, only covering one joint. But what is ASTC name? That it has two codes. One has LTS code, but and second is OTS code. That L code is name of the joint involved, and OTS code is alphanumeric code. What you are seeing, that alphanumeric basically for technician who are preparing the orthosis, what is prefabricated, what any customization needed or not, and L code are joint, and lastly it will followed by the function it defines. So aeroplane splint in ASTC classification we will call as a immobilization, abduction, positioning, aeroplane designing. Even we will include designing also, include thoracic and support bar with not torsion joint. It means there is no joint involved. So it is a so descriptive but little bit difficult to understand. Second example of nomenclature. Common name, resting hand splint, WHO, ISO name, commonly we are using both simultaneously. ASTC name will be again start with the L, that is OTS code, and wrist, this second will be the L code, WHFO, that come with the prefabricated or custom fabricated. That prefabricated will noted by PF or custom fabricated without joints, and it will have different OTS, so I am named OTS of any type, it will be called as same. Coming to the goal, simple common goals are there in upper limb. Lower limb it will be further few goals will be added. In upper limb, first what are the goals of orthosis? Relieve pain, manage deformities, prevent excessive range, also protect the joints, allow the movements, okay, promotes healing and functional effects. There are few biomechanical principles due to paucity of time. I will skip this. These are 3-point control system. That tissue tolerance and compression forces, shear forces we have to consider before prescribing it. Biomechanical levers, I think this will be another class. And selection of material and which type of orthosis we have to give, that is statics or dynamic, but I will skip this since I have only 20 minutes. This is 3-point pressure control. So one is static, 2 points we are pressing it. Then for this, we in upper limb we have to choose, important, we have to choose low pressure orthosis because it has to wear for longer duration. If there is a high amount of pressure, more than 100 mmHg, then we cannot give orthosis for longer duration of time. This we have to take into consider. And longer stretching time will reduce the contracture more rapidly. Also, large pressure area is better tolerated and there is a less chances of forming ulceration or tissue injury. Most important, in static orthosis, we have to look into the arches of the hand and we have to give the orthosis the way the arches of hand, that is 2 arches, longitudinal arch and 2 transverse arches should be in a neutral position. For static orthosis, we always remember this into mind. Again, this biomechanics, I will skip this. Mostly class 1 lever is followed, sometimes class 2, class 3 lever are also there in upper limb. So we have to take consideration which class of lever is acting on which joint, and we have to prescribe the orthosis. This is angle of pull, something like angle of pull. If we are giving finger orthosis, especially radial, then we have to keep the pull should be perpendicular to the joint line. Otherwise, if it is oblique, then there will be the transverse ligament. There will be excessive pressure on transverse ligament or collateral ligament, and instability will there. Again, while prescribing orthosis, it has to recommend that orthotics and the physician or physiatrist should be there while evaluation and the prescription. So what we want exactly we can communicate. While at the checkout also, it is recommended that orthotics who has prepared that orthosis should be there, that if any correction is there, we can inform directly or do it. Coming to the categorization of orthosis, there are various, this is important part to understand for PG. We can categorize orthosis in a different ways, but the most important categorization I told you, static and dynamic, for understanding the function. But there are different ways. We can categorize it according to the pathology. We can categorize it according to the joint involved, that it is been done in a ISO. And it has also sub-categorization, that is therapeutic category, whether orthosis is given for therapeutic purpose or any functional gain purpose. What is therapeutic and functional? I will just tell. On left of my screen is therapeutic, that is static wrist hand orthosis, static hand orthosis, static elbow orthosis. But when it is become functional, if we attach any functional attachment to the any hand orthosis or wrist hand orthosis, same static orthosis can become the functional orthosis. That if you modify it with the clips or packet or any writing device or page turner to the hand or any utensil holder in a hand orthosis, same static orthosis will become the functional one. You will see. On left of my side is, we are seeing hand orthosis, Rancho's design. This is called as the Rancho's design. And same Rancho's design is been applied with the pencil holder, and above is the clamp. We can hold pen, pencil, whatever. So coming to the, what are the common static hand orthosis? First we will start from distal to proximal. This is HO we have discussed. This is WHO or wrist hand orthosis. What is functions? To come on Fiji. Again slipping. Okay, I have one. आपके लिए इनाम है, अगर जगह हो तो इनाम लास्ट में मिलेगा, बट जगह चाहिए. Okay, it supports and maintain the functional architecture of the hand. I told about the something I told is about the arches, na? Yes, that help and protect the arches. So if arches are protected, function will be preserved. Okay, also protect the deformities. Okay, and also provide the attachment. I told you functional. We can, on static orthosis, we can attach the functional attachments. So in WHO there are two attachments. This is also design of static orthosis, WHO, where we can give extension. Sometimes this is also Rancho's design. We can give extension. What there are two extension. One is a MCP hyperextension stop. Can I have pointer? Fast. This is MCP hyperextension stop, and this is IP joint assist. These two attachment we can provide in a WHO. Coming to the static hand orthosis, we have discussed, so we will skip it. Elbow orthosis, again there are two, static and dynamic. We are discussing the static elbow orthosis. For what purpose we give? We give it to reduce the contracture, okay, or maintain the joint position. For this we need that any lock elbow joint, and we need a ratchet system or turnbuckle system where we can hold the elbow joint in a position, okay. It can be prefabricated or custom fabricated, and also this turnbuckle system will have a function to improve the or increase the ROM with the going or period. Then moving proximal, which orthosis, this is a gunslinger orthosis or common as shoulder elbow orthosis. What function? It provides the immobilization in the shoulder elbow joints, okay. This orthosis is stabilized on a pelvis, hemipelvic girdle, and along with the arm. That arm is a fixed one. When it is moving, what we call it as a mobile arm support. Here arm is a fixed. This arm is a fixed. But even with this, the person is able to do some activity with the hand. Only elbow and shoulder is immobilized. Where we give this mostly in a brachial plexus injury. It is better than a sling. If you keep that hand in a pouch, that person is not able to do any activity. So this orthosis should be preferred over the sling or pouch. This will give the functional chances for patient in a brachial plexus injury. Coming more proximally, this is what is WHO name? Shoulder, elbow, wrist orthosis. We have seen aeroplane splint, same design, aeroplane design, but here along with the shoulder, the elbow and wrist also immobilized. It is static design. It is a static design. It can be prefabricated one or custom fabricated. Where it is given, brachial, again most indication is a brachial plexus injury, or we can give it in a burn, rotator cuff tear, or post repair, okay, post capsular repair, okay. Keeping this, what are the objective? Keeping the glenohumeral joint in a most abducted position. Now we are moving ahead from static orthosis to the dynamic orthosis. Please let me know when my 20 minutes is finished, because I know I cannot cover this time in 20 minutes.
You can add another 10-20 minutes.
Still it will be lesser, I think so.
Anything for you, no special.
So, no, I cannot exceed my time. So, coming to the dynamic orthosis, what is it? What is the difference between static and dynamic orthosis? Come on, backside, please answer. No sleeping. I have chocolates, lot of chocolates. Movement is possible, yes. Movement is possible, and it can be driven by different mechanism, but mostly it is by body forces and from the proximal body part. Again, it can be subcategorized into two, therapeutic and functional. When it has given only to joint movement, it is therapeutic, and when it is given for any functional gain, any attachment with attachment, it is called as a functional orthosis. But things are attached, strings are attached, dynamic orthosis are very difficult to make. So, simplest form of dynamic orthosis is wrist action, wrist hand orthosis. In this, there should be stop for it has this wrist action, wrist hand orthosis has both functions, static as well as dynamic. We can give as a static orthosis also. It has top that we can make wrist stable in any position. It has both flexion stop as well as extension stop, and it can assist with the wrist extensor function with this. Sometimes with the muscle, or sometimes we give additionally spring or rubber band to assist that function. So one more question, one more chocolate. Is it WHO, wrist action WHO? I kept question purposefully for post lunch session to make you aware. Come on, hayya nahi, yes or no? Yes. Then why? Does it have wrist stop? No. Only it is permitting the wrist action, but it don't have stop. We cannot give this orthosis as a positional orthosis. Second, functional, this orthosis has extended design, that finger, it is being immobilized. Most important, we cannot call it is dynamic wrist orthosis, but we cannot call it as a wrist action WHO. For this, it should be given in a both therapeutic as well as static. It is not possible. Second, dynamic orthosis. This is racket or ratchet wrist hand orthosis. It has slightly different mechanism. It has ratchet, and for this giving this orthosis, we have to immobilize these two fingers. Second and third, we have to make this one unit, and also we will immobilize the thumb. Okay, and for holding the object, person has to move this from another hand. He will hold the object and lift it, and for release there is a ratchet over here. We have to push it, then object will be released. So this is mostly given in a quadriplegic patient, C5 level, for gaining some independence. The better version of this ratchet hand orthosis is electrical power prehension unit, where there is a motor. Same principle is same, but DC motor is doing for you, and this pronation and supination will do the job for you. Okay. If you pronation will produce the prehension, pronation action will hold the grasp the object, and supination will release the object. So same function is done by the motor. Then third, dynamic orthosis, which is working on wrist driven wrist hand orthosis. This is also mostly given in a quadriplegic. So what is different of this orthosis is, for this some function of wrist extensor should be there, and what in this ring ratchet, you was doing the grasping activity. Here wrist extensor tenodesis mechanism will do the grasp for you. And there is ratchet mechanism also available. We can hold the wrist in desired position. This is Desi version of same WHO, where wrist extension is providing the grasp and wrist flexion is in the release. Coming to the moving proximal to the elbow, this is dynamic elbow orthosis. Here we don't have that bar, ROM adduction bar or turnbuckle bar. Here joint is free to move. it is just we are providing stability to the joint, mediolateral stability to the joint. We are allowing the movement of joint. Coming to the functional, this is another variation of elbow orthosis, dynamic elbow orthosis, where there is a spring and lock mechanism, where person is doing, I think 20 minutes is over. I will just finish this topic and move on.
Another 10 minutes.
Just I will finish this topic.
We can complete by 5:30. We will complete in 5 minutes. So we can complete by 5 minutes.
Here spring mechanism is there, where we can lock the elbow in a desired position, again move, again lock. It will be automatically locked. So, and we can give this orthosis in reverse position to do the same with the mobile extension, elbow extension also. We can do for elbow flexion or elbow extension. So my last question, if anybody identify, PG side, which orthosis is this? Name the orthosis. It is a static elbow orthosis. Okay. There are many orthoses applied in a special condition, in a burn, TBI. Okay. There are adaptive devices. There are orthoses applied in a spinal cord injuries. This is mobile arm support, which provides the functional gain in a quadriplegic person. WHO we have decided. In C6, this wrist driven WHO provides the mostly function gain by the wrist action. Universal cuff is the most versatile and commonly used in a quadriplegic C6 level, and for C5 level we have to give additional wrist support. There are role of tendon transfer also. If there are high quadriplegia, we should go for tendon transfer or neuroprosthesis. And there are orthoses given in a arthritic condition. There are small orthoses very useful. Okay. This commonly used orthosis in boutonniere and swan neck deformity. First is the boutonniere deformity, second is the swan neck deformity. Again, this thumb spica is given in a common condition, painful CMC joint or dequerence. It has two designs. We can give wrist or we can give hand. There are orthoses in RA. And lastly, this is dynamic cock-up spin given in a radial nerve palsy. With this, I will summarize. Orthosis is a externally applied device used to modify the structure and function. ISO classification or nomenclature is the most commonly adopted system. There are multiple ways of categorization, but the static and dynamic orthosis categorization is easier to understand their function, and physiatrist, orthotist has to carefully evaluate the patient and choose the appropriate orthosis according to the desired effect or the functional gain. Thank you very much for patient listening.
Thank you, sir. So that was the last lecture for this session. Now we'll proceed to the post-session felicitation ceremony. Can we have on stage Dr. Amit Dhumale sir to give away the memento and certificate to Dr. Anuradha Shenoy.